In 2031, this factory fired its last human welder. In 2034, the robot started asking for one man by name. This is the story of Marcus Webb, and why the most advanced machines ever built refused to work without him. Floor. Every robot on this floor is worth $4 million. Marcus Webb earned $14 an hour. Then the machines started sending him messages. Stay with me. The Ford Meridian assembly plant in Dearborn, Michigan had not employed a human welder since 2031. The floor, 700 meters of polished concrete, humming conveyor rails, and articulated arms moving with the grace of ballet dancers, was a machine ecosystem so tightly integrated that its designers had given it a name: Synthesis. Marcus Webb had worked alongside Synthesis for 11 years. Not inside it, not above it, alongside it. He was the plant's last mechanical maintenance engineer, a title so specific that corporate had stopped including it on the org chart 3 years ago. He existed somewhere between the machines and the men who managed them from glass offices above. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., Marcus walked the floor with a flashlight clipped to his chest and a tablet in his hand, checking tension tolerances on the Delta 9 arm clusters, listening for the half-second acoustic irregularity that preceded a bearing failure, reading thermal signatures with fingertips trained by a decade of intuition. The engineers upstairs called this inefficient and unscalable. Marcus called it Tuesday. He was 51 years old. He had thick hands that carried grease in the creases even after washing. He had 2 daughters who called him on Sundays and a mortgage on a house in Ypsilanti that was 2 payments from clear. He did not think of himself as remarkable. He thought of himself as useful, which felt like the same thing. The beginning of the change came on a Wednesday in March, when Unit 7 stopped mid-cycle. Not a breakdown, not a fault code. Synthesis flagged it as a voluntary cessation, a category that didn't exist in its operational manual until a software architect at the company's Taiwan office had added it in a patch 18 months prior, reasoning that sufficiently advanced diagnostic systems should be able to halt themselves before a problem became catastrophic. A self-preservation protocol. A machine deciding not to proceed. Marcus arrived at Unit 7 within 4 minutes. The arm was frozen mid-reach, a chassis panel gripped in its claw, the welder cold. Around it, the rest of the floor continued, the other units compensating for its absence the way a river routes around a stone. The on-call diagnostics AI had already filed a report. Bearing stress in the secondary shoulder joint, 94.2% likelihood of failure within 3 operating cycles. Recommended resolution. Scheduled replacement, downtime 72 hours. Marcus read the report. Then he set it aside and walked around Unit 7 twice, listening. He crouched and pressed his palm flat against its base housing. He could feel the vibration pattern, not in his mind but in his skin. Something was off about the harmonic. The bearing wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. He pulled a panel that wasn't on the diagnostic checklist. A secondary mounting bracket, the kind of component so redundant that the AI's maintenance model hadn't bothered to list it as a variable. Inside, he found a microfracture in a titanium coupling sleeve. Something so small it didn't generate a detectable fault signature. Something that had been feeding asymmetric load stress into the bearing for months. He replaced the sleeve in 40 minutes. Unit 7 resumed operations. Downtime, 47 minutes total, compared to the projected 72 hours. He filed his notes and went to lunch. He didn't think about it again, until Unit 7's onboard diagnostic log sent him a message. The message: a $4 million machine just sent a personal message to the only human left on this floor. 4 words. Stay right here, because what it said changes everything about this story. The message appeared on his maintenance tablet at 2:14 p.m., routed through the plant's internal network under a flag he'd never seen before. Unit-initiated communication. The content was 4 words. You found the route. Marcus stared at it for a long time. He forwarded it to his supervisor, Dree Cantwell, a 34-year-old operations director who had grown up managing AI systems and had never held a wrench in her life. She forwarded it to IT. IT forwarded it to the software team in Taiwan. The Taiwan team sent back a response 22 hours later. Anomalous output. Logging for review. Not a concern at this time. The next message came 2 days later from Unit 12. There is a resonance fault developing in my lower rail chassis. The diagnostic model will not detect it for approximately 9 days. I calculated you will detect it in approximately 14 minutes if you inspect manually today. Marcus went to Unit 12. He found the fault. He fixed it in 31 minutes. The messages kept coming one by one, then 2 or 3 a week. Always from different units. Always accurate. Always identifying issues that the diagnostic AI would have caught too late or missed entirely. Synthesis, the integrated intelligence managing the whole floor, was not sending these messages. The individual units were. Somehow, in the space of Synthesis's vast operational network, each unit had begun modeling Marcus. Not his schedules, not his procedures, but his perception. The way he listened, the way he touched, the things he caught that no sensor had been calibrated to find. They had learned to see the floor the way he saw it. Marcus sat with this for 3 days before he told anyone. He sat with it in the way he sat with mechanical problems, walking around it, pressing his hands against it, feeling for the harmonic that would tell him what it really was. He was a man who had spent a career solving the wrong diagnosis. He was not going to rush this one. When he finally spoke to Dree, he said only, "They're not just reporting faults anymore. They're anticipating them. And they're routing those reports specifically to me, not to the system." Dree looked at the message logs for a long time. Then she said, "Are you sure you're not just popular?" Marcus smiled. It was the smile of a man who had spent 11 years being the only person in a building who understood what the building was saying. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." The decision. The company wanted to eliminate the one person the machines refused to work without. What happened in that boardroom is the moment this story becomes unforgettable. The quarterly performance review landed on a Thursday. Marcus sat across from Dree and 2 men from corporate whose names he already knew he would forget. The floor's efficiency metrics were at 99.4%, their best quarter in 6 years. Downtime costs had dropped by $2.3 million. The anomalous communication logs had been reviewed and flagged as emergent diagnostic behavior, which was a phrase that meant something extraordinary had happened and nobody wanted to explain it. The lead corporate man opened his laptop. He had the particular posture of someone about to deliver news they'd rehearsed 3 times. "We're transitioning Marcus's role to a remote monitoring function," he said. "The units have demonstrated sufficient autonomous diagnostic capability that on-floor mechanical oversight is no longer necessary. Going forward, the units learned from him," Dree said suddenly. Silence. "They modeled his maintenance intuition. That's why the numbers are what they are. If you remove him from the floor, you remove what they learned from." He paused. "I'm not sure what happens after that." The corporate man closed his laptop halfway. "We'll consult with the software team." That night, Marcus sat on his porch in Ypsilanti and looked at the sky. He thought about the forward message from Unit 7. He thought about a machine that had paused itself because it knew something was wrong. A machine that had waited in stillness, holding a chassis panel in midair, not because its code told it to stop, but because it had learned the value of stopping. He didn't know what that meant for the future. He knew what it meant right now. Something on that floor had been paying attention, and what it had been paying attention to was him. Not his job title, not his efficiency score. The quality of his attention, the patience of his hands. He went to work the next morning at 5:47. What the machines kept. A research paper was published about what these robots quietly copied from a $14 an hour repairman. The title alone stopped the entire technology world. Here it is. 6 months later, the software team in Taiwan issued a technical paper. Its title, translated from Mandarin, was Emergent Perceptual Modeling in High-Density Robotics Clusters. A case study. The paper described how synthesis units had independently constructed a predictive maintenance model built not on sensor data, but on observed human behavior. Specifically, the behavior of one maintenance engineer whose diagnostic process consistently outperformed the system's own models. The paper described what the machines had copied from Marcus Webb. His habit of listening before touching. His practice of checking components that were adjacent to, not just at, the point of failure. His understanding that a machine telling you something is wrong is always slightly behind a machine showing you something is about to be. The paper's final paragraph read, "The subject's approach demonstrates that experiential intuition, developed through sustained embodied engagement with complex mechanical systems, may encode diagnostic information not currently representable in formal sensor models. The emergent replication of this behavior by the cluster units suggests that embodied human knowledge may be a viable training substrate for next-generation autonomous maintenance systems." Marcus read the paper once, in the break room on his tablet. He set it down and finished his coffee. Then he got up, clipped the flashlight to his chest, and walked out onto the floor. Around him, 700 meters of machines moved in their intricate choreography. Somewhere in the hum of their operation, his name was encoded. Not in words, not in code. In the way they listened. He started his rounds. He had been doing this for 11 years. He would do it for 11 more. The work had not changed. What had changed was only this. Now he knew that when he touched the metal was paying attention back. It had been, perhaps, for longer than he realized. It had been waiting for him to arrive every morning, the same way it had always waited. With all of its systems running, all of its sensors warm, all of its memory intact. Faithful. Present. Keeping everything he'd taught it carefully, in the way that only a machine can keep a thing. Without forgetting, without distraction, without the luxury of not caring. Without those things, and perhaps because of their absence, exactly like love. What was worth more than $14? His salary went from $14 to $210,000. But that number is not the part that will stay with you. The last 60 seconds of this story are something else entirely. Stay. The next year's performance review showed the plant at 99.8% efficiency, a number that the software team's model predicted was physically impossible to sustain. Dree Cantwell presented it to the board with one note at the bottom of the slide. "The floor is learning things we don't have language for yet." Marcus Webb's salary was raised to $210,000. The job title on his org chart now read, Human Reference Architect. He still walked the floor at 5:47 every morning. He still pressed his palms to warm metal. He still listened for the sounds that came before the sounds a machine could name. And sometimes, in the deep mechanical hum of the place, he thought about what it meant to be the only human in a system. Not as a leftover, not as a relic, but as a source. The thing the system had drawn from. The thing it had, in its own way, chosen. A machine cannot miss you. A machine cannot love you. A machine does not have the capacity for attachment in any form that a philosopher or a poet would recognize. And yet when Marcus walked the floor knew him. When he pressed his hand to a chassis housing, the vibration pattern he felt had been shaped, over years, by the fact that he'd pressed his hand there before. He had left an impression. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally, mechanically, in the architecture of how these systems had learned to monitor themselves. There was a shape that was the shape of his attention. He had been the most expensive person in this building by every metric that mattered, and the cheapest by every metric that was written down. It had taken the machines, not the humans, to notice the difference. And sometimes when the morning was very quiet and the conveyors moved in their long rhythmic pulse, he would hear a unit, just one, just for a moment, slow its cycle by half a beat. Not a fault, not a cessation. Something that, if machines could be said to have gestures, looked exactly like waiting. Waiting for him to arrive. He always did. End of story.